So welcome everybody to the Queer Cinema for Palestine screening in Montreal, to the panel discussion after the films have screened. Before we start, we would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today on unceded Indigenous land. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the land and waters on which we gather today in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Colonially known as Montreal, is historically a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home for many Indigenous people, settlers, immigrants, refugees, and descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. We recognize that Canada is a settler colonial state with a history of forced displacement, ethnic cleansing, cultural erasure, genocide, and slavery. We recognize that Canada's colonial violence continues today, embedded in all the structures which make up the settler colonial state. We recognize that Palestine and Turtle Island are both occupied territories, and that in order to resist colonization abroad, we must first address how we are complicit in the continuous colonial process here in Tiohtià:ke. We recognize that decolonization is not simply a metaphor for social justice and societal improvements, that it involves material reparations and giving back of indigenous land and life, both here and in Palestine. We recognize that only in upholding our history of transnational solidarity with the indigenous peoples of this land against settler colonialism and global imperialism, we can live together in dignity. So yeah.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you.
Marhaba, Raffat and Roy. Thank you for being with us today. Yeah, I mean, I first want to contextualize this conversation just to say that this discussion this recorded discussion is going to follow a screening of your films with the film of Mohammed Swed Cinema Al-Fuad, and who unfortunately could not be with us today, and Jumana Mannah's Blessed Oblivion. Yeah, I mean, following the screening will be this recorded discussion, and after that, the Palestinian Youth Movement will be leading a discussion. And I wanted to kind of contextualize this because Queer Cinema for Palestine, which is an event that started in Toronto and is being organized in 12 cities around the world, really started to bring in films that refused and boycotted any film festivals that were funded by the Israeli settler colonial state, and specifically is overlapping with Tel Aviv Fest. So in mid-November, to kind of create this alternative platform. So if you boycotted Tel Aviv Fest, if you've chosen to, if you've refused to be implicated in Israeli pinkwashing, there's another platform where your films can show. For the Montreal iteration, we wanted to actually bring in specifically Arabic-speaking films from the Arab world, and follow this with a space where Palestinian youth, Arab youth, can have a conversation about queerness and Palestine in the same space, which is a rarity here in North America and in the West, in the sense that queerness is very much essentialized as an individual identity, as a matter of individual pride or even collective pride. But I think that, in our case, maybe, these different identities are really one entanglement. Our struggle as queer, as anti-colonial, when we talk about Palestine and we're queer, we're really we can't help but entangle them together. And so, yeah, I mean, this is kind of what has structured the curation of this program, in that all of these films bring these parallels together, right? And create some sort of weaving of queerness and the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. So I guess we will start with Raffat's film.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from there you kind of take on this idea, you know, in the different films, these intersections come in different ways. And I guess with Raffat's film, it was really interesting to see, in much the same way, that parallel between kind of that, you know, the narrative of Palestinian struggle and the life of Palestinians, paralleled very visually in this kind of parallel cutting with this performance of the mermaids, right? And one thing to kind of say about the title of the name, like in Arabic, Huriya wa Hurriya, it's like a play on words, right? You've got these like, you know, this performance of these two individuals in their, you know, on the beach, and you've got the interview, and you have that parallel creating that kind of tension that really, again, that Razan spoke about. So Raffat, maybe if we take it to you, how do you think and conceive in the work of that parallel, and how does it kind of, was it something you were kind of very, you know, conscious in choosing, or was it something that came out of it?
Okay, this film I started to work on when I was researching my family's history. I grew up not knowing much about my family's history, and I just heard stories because I didn't really I didn't meet my grandfather that my aunt is talking about in the film. He passed away when my father was 4 years old, so he was absent. I just heard about him. And my grandmother passed away when I was 20, something like that. I wasn't aware enough to go and document and ask questions and record everything. And suddenly I felt like there's something missing, something that I don't understand. And I started researching, and only to realize that my family tree goes until my grandfather. I don't know their grandfathers. I don't know the stories. And actually I decided to stop there because that was reality for me. That's what I knew. And I went to my aunt to ask her about the story that I heard from her, to tell me about my family. And I started thinking how I relate to this story. It's always the being in between, because I was born in Jaffa. I grew up in Jaffa, but Jaffa is under the municipality of Tel Aviv. Although Jaffa is much older, it's like 5,000 years old, and Tel Aviv is from 1906. So, but somehow Jaffa became a periphery of Tel Aviv. But growing up as a teenage, for us as teenagers, we always went to Tel Aviv. That was the city we went to bars, to cafes, to hang out, because at Jaffa we didn't have all this nightlife, let's call it. And growing up before I became queer, I was just a gay teenager, feeling rejected and bullied in Jaffa. So Tel Aviv for me was the place that I can go far away and find myself, but only to realize that I formed a new closet being Arab, being Palestinian in Tel Aviv, I needed to hide it because, okay, you're rejected as gay, as queer in the Palestinian society in Jaffa, so you choose to go to Tel Aviv to hang out, but there you're bullied because you're Palestinian. So you're always in the middle. You don't fit. So I don't fit in Jaffa, I don't fit in Tel Aviv. I chose this specific location for my film. It's the neighborhood called Manshiyeh. My grandmother is from Manshiyeh, and Manshiyeh was erased at 48 at the Nakba, and there's a big gap there. So I chose this specific location to be in the middle because this neighborhood is on the border. It's an imaginative border. Let's say that there is no border there, but everybody knows that Jaffa ends there and Tel Aviv starts there at this neighborhood. And being in the middle, being half in the sea and half on the shore, being on the ground of Jaffa, the Palestinian Jaffa, but looking at Tel Aviv. You can see Tel Aviv from the point where I stand. And I chose the mermaid as a symbol of being a hybrid, because I believe my identity is multi-layered. And every time I need to deal with a different aspect in my identity, being in Jaffa, but working in Tel Aviv, all the time this traveling to Tel Aviv, but going back home to Jaffa, you question your identity according to what's happening around you. And if I want to refer a little bit to the classic story of The Little Mermaid of Hans Christian Andersen, that the mermaid, she knows, she lives in the ocean and she's looking outside. She falls in love with this other world, but when she sacrifices her voice and her family and her history to go to the other side, only to realize she doesn't fit. I'm not talking about Disney with the happy ending. I'm talking about the original story. She doesn't fit at the other side. And when she decides to go back to the ocean rejects her because she dies in the end. So being in the middle, not able to choose. Today, as a grown-up person, I realize that I don't have to choose. I don't want to choose. This is my place of strength, my power to not to choose, not to have. I don't have to choose. But when I was younger, I felt this need of belonging, and I didn't belong. I tried to belong, I couldn't belong. And this video reflects this. You have the history, my family's history, but I'm writing a new history. I'm bringing new ideas. Maybe now I can't feel it, but I'm looking, let's say 10, 20 years, 50 years to the future, being queer, Palestinian, talking about multi-layered identity. I think we are making change and writing a new history in the Palestinian society.
Thank you, Raffat. Yeah, I mean, speaking of like this multiplicity that you're referring to, I feel like you know, when to go back to kind of the arc of the program, right? Like of this program of short films, of short queer films. To me, it also brings that multiplicity, right? Like it brings also the multiplicity of, you know, what the Palestinian struggle has gone through. Starting with your aunt recounting the Nakba, and this is where, like, I also think about the merman as also, you know, as the sea, the Mediterranean Sea being a huge part of our Nakba. And then, you know, thinking of Muhammad Sweid's Cinema al-Fuad, where the Palestinian liberation struggle moves into a full internationalist revolution and armed struggle, and you know, the dream of returning to Palestine is the reality, is the reality that is, you know, that you can foresee in the very near future. And this is where Oscar kind of takes us into true love as the liberation of Palestine. And I feel like this is where Roy Deeb's film Montreal 2010 kind of, just like Oslo, popped our you know, was kind of the I don't want to say popped, it's more like a dagger in the back of this liberatory project into what Ramallah looks like today, really, like this kind of city of then, you know, the city of the neoliberal project, reconstruction as liberation. And this is where, like, you know, in our mind, at least as curators, we were thinking, because because behind the camera, we really can't see the queer couple, and they're really kind of having this conversation about whether to show their queerness or not. In our mind, this was also about, like, the liberatory project going into the closet as well, and into, like, Ramallah as this one big closet of our you know, our liberation. So this is where Roy, you know, I don't know, these were our reflections on your film, but you know, how were you thinking about this parallel that you've created between the story of this queer couple and the city, Ramallah, as, like, Palestine today?
Yeah, hello first. Yeah, I would start with the idea of how this project started. In fact, my first intention while working on Montreal 2010 was that I'm interested in telling my story in relation to the Palestinian cause and the resistance and the occupation of Palestine by Israel. But at the same time, I was even myself somehow a bit becoming insensitive or not able to hear the same stories again, where I can't relate to anymore. So my aim was to try to find a different way to tackle the same Nakba, where to be able also to open doors for different questions that would go back to the same topic at the end, but would push a different curiosity. So this whole research led me to start working on Montreal 2010. And it's important to know here is that the whole video is a constructed work. So I haven't filmed. Those are not my footage. I've been asking people that I met in Jordan from Ramallah to film in Ramallah for a different reason. Even, like, I was telling them, you would please take the camera, and if someday I come and visit you in Ramallah, where you would take me in the city, take the camera and show me the places. And I was collecting back those footage in Jordan, coming back to Beirut, and I did this for 2-3 years. but mainly the footage used in Montreal 2010 or filmed in 2010. So, and there was the reconstruction of the text and the dialogues and recording of the sound in Lebanon with 2 actors superposed to the video to make it feel as if they were there. So this reconstruction of the film is important to talk about because I reconstruct a different Ramallah even in the film. And in fact, I don't know Ramallah. I've never been to Ramallah, and I didn't want to pretend that through doing this film I would know the city. So on purpose, I even sometimes, like one road in the film, I would cut it in the editing and make it take you from point A to B. Then the same road would take you from point S to T. I don't know. Though I know that, in fact, logically, it doesn't work this way. And someone from Ramallah, to see the video, he would know that there's something not working here with the landscape and the routing of the film. But I want this on purpose to be able to make it clear that, in fact, it is a constructed city for someone who has a political relation to a city that he has never seen. So here I would come to, like this introduction would get me to the point that you were talking about, Razan, because in fact I haven't thought about the closet thing before in this perspective, but now that you mentioned it, I find it interesting that somehow the closet, Brahim in the film is the one who's in the closet and doesn't want his boyfriend to tell the other people that they're gay. And for me, it was a dramatic element that I use as a constraint. And by this constraint, it helps me to explore deeper the situation that we're dealing with. But in fact, him not being able to express his sexuality is in parallel faced by him also not being able to express his relation to Ramallah and not being able to admit that he is witnessing the disappearance of the city, which is the main problematic facing Brahim in the film, is that this is the first time he visits a city, in this city that he always wanted to visit, and once he is there, he's not able to understand what's happening around him, and he finds himself at the end facing a harsh reality, where mainly by the last scene on the rooftop, there's this other Palestinian from Ramallah who's telling him about all the settlements, and every time he mentions a settlement, he says, and this was there and now it's closer, and this was there and now it's closer, and this is closer and it's closer, and he suddenly feel that he's simply witnessing the disappearance of a city. And also here, the thing is that we all know that Ramallah is the least of the cities that is in danger to disappear because of the political situation. But it's also about all the other cities that already disappeared in Palestine. And now Raffat was talking about Jaffa, the older city that became an annex to Tel Aviv, this young new city of the occupied state. So yeah, like this, all those questions related to each other make it rethink the relation to Ramallah, the relation, and mainly here, and this should be clear also, that my position in the film and the positioning of the film itself is still of a Lebanese who has never been to Ramallah, and a Lebanese who has a relation to Palestine, a political, emotional relation, and it does not put itself in position of representing neither Ramallah, neither the people of Ramallah. It's positioning ourselves from here to there. And talking about this positioning also is that the idea of, like, what was important also to me is that usually queer cinema make this focus usually on the body, the isn't that's actually Sachs. But here, in fact, we don't see the protagonists in the film, and the city become the body that we're talking about. And if you notice in the whole film, I made it on purpose to have all the time Palestine as the first layer of the image, and to have Israel in the third and fourth layer, either by the wall or by the soldiers, the army, and the settlers, and to have the focus in this body all the time on the streets of Ramallah, the cafes, the roads, the small details of the city. So it's through the gaze of those protagonists that we're able to see the city, and this gaze become queer and political in the sense of like how we're dealing with it.
I think that's really interesting to think about, you know, this idea of trying to queer this gaze that's kind of looking at the city, but then also of shifting the queer gaze on the body into the outside. And I think that's one thing within really the program in general, is this idea that, you know, Razan spoke a little bit about like queerness in some ways in the West as being removed from individualized and a little bit removed. It's segmented into its own dialogue, whereas with a lot of these films, you kind of, you know, and talking about queerness in the context of Palestine in general, or maybe even, you know, the Middle East or the Arab world in a larger way, the inability to do this, I think, forces filmmakers and artists to like always queer narratives, always queer their gaze, queer the formal elements of these things. And I think that's something that, you know, you really can see in Jumana's work, and, you know, in all of these films. But I did want to bring it back to, you know, what do you think about it? Because also with Raffat, with you, you know, we can talk about how you're taking this kind of documentary oral history documentation perspective and queering that as well as a way to deal with all of this relationship. Just as Roy mentioned, he's kind of reappropriating this gaze. So I just want to know, like, yeah, how do you guys feel about that, about like the ability for sometimes, you know, like this kind of forcing our ability to talk about these things, and in a way a positive, for what I think is a positive thing, where you can't remove it. It all kind of so intermingled, and you just have to think about and deal with it. So yeah, maybe we'll start with Raffat and then go to Roy.
And you know, if I might just add to that, it's very clear, and that queering is very clear in the formal aspects. Yani we have a very kind of traditional oral history, recounting from your aunt of the Nakba, and then kind of again this parallel cutting with performance. A fiction element. And so, yeah, how does that, I guess, work formally as well?
In this video, my aunt is the only person that's talking. Actually, she's telling her story.
Sure.
And I'm bringing all the queer aspect just in being, just my existence. Talking about queerness, but when I talk about a queer thinking, it is the thing that to be queer or to think queerly is to deconstruct the language and deconstruct reality as it is, and it's more in breaking ways of thinking, breaking the habits, breaking the traditions. So this is, again, we're talking about this conflict, breaking the traditions, traditional thinking, but from the other hand, yeah, I'm related to my family and to their history. And I'm saying it's their history because I didn't experience the Nakba. So they experienced the Nakba. I didn't experience the Nakba. All my life is based on it, my future, my present and future based on it, but I didn't experience it. And that's why I was talking before that I'm creating a new history that based on the Nakba and what's after the Nakba. So when I talk about queer thinking is try to talk beyond gender and try to talk beyond sexuality. It's how you live a queer way of thinking in your relationship and in your daily life, not only related to gender and sexuality, but understanding that queer is not accepting things as they are and try to build a new way of thinking, a new way of living for yourself, for your environment. So from one hand, I'm talking about multi-layered reality, and because I'm trying to avoid the word complexity, but it's there.
Actually, on that note, I'm curious what happened when you showed the film to your aunt? On the note of like, breaking with tradition or traditional ways of telling retelling the Nakba.
The first thing she said, this is not what I expected. Because usually when you interview an older member of a family, and it's an interview, so they expect to hear the whole story. I cut the story. It's cut to pieces. I just chose small pieces. I couldn't make 1 hour interview of my. It's a video art, and I know from my experience as an artist, video art beyond 3-4 minutes, people won't sit and see it and watch it. That's because I know that this video was intended to be shown in galleries and not as a film. That's why I had to make it short and not long. I wanted to be like in an introduction, something like a promo for something. That was what my thinking, to make something that wanna tell there is a bigger picture, there's a bigger story, and we all know there's a bigger story, but I chose to just start to talk about it. It was like a first step of saying, okay, I'm starting here, and we all know there's more. And my aunt, I think she was a little bit disappointed, but it was okay. I think she accepted it. She accepted it because we're talking about the queerness. But my parents were shocked not by the movie, but by the tattoo.
Right.
They asked, "Is it a real tattoo?" And I said, "Yes." They couldn't understand, and they couldn't accept that I'm doing something on my body just to film it and make it an artistic statement. So here again, we have each side with their shock or what they can accept, what they can accept, and then you accept it as reality and say, okay, that's it. There's nothing that we can do. It's done.
No, but I think that's interesting. I mean, and definitely feeds into like, you're pushing the boundaries on the real world and kind of, exactly. But then at the same time, you're also talking about creating these new realities for yourself, for your family, and in the film. And I think that's such an interesting notion to think about, way to think about queerness in general, but also about like what kind of this kind of struggle entails. And I think in a very interesting way, it speaks directly to Roy, to your film, where you're literally in the film imagining a different reality, and you're talking about it where the border between Beirut and Palestine is open, where you can kind of do this kind of journey. And so, yeah, I don't know, maybe how does that resonate with your work and what you were thinking in the film?
I totally agree with what Raffat talked about, and the way that he described queer in this situation. It's much more into the decomposition and deconstructing the language and the elements and the aesthetics and and like being able to pose definitions. And here I quote someone who inspired me for this work and for a lot of my work, the Lebanese writer and journalist Nahla Shahal, who once were talking about politics, about Tripoli mainly in Lebanon, and she said something like, we lack imaginary in politics, and it clicked something in my head, and I started thinking more about the question. And somehow in a lot of my work today that is very political, I try all the time to go back to this lack of imaginative approach in dealing with politics. And exactly as you said, Muhammad, is like Montreal 2010 is based on an impossible journey. It's a Lebanese gay couple who take their car and drive from Beirut to Ramallah and drive back from Ramallah to Beirut, which is an impossible journey to do. But the thing is that what if this is possible? So starting with this, what if this is possible, and starting with the what if this gay couple can exist and move between Beirut and Ramallah in this patriarchal, homophobic societies, where their presence and their movement between those spaces, what if this is allowed to happen? So this will establish already a deconstruction of this whole border, not allowing to happen, not allowing to do the journey, and start asking questions in a different frame that would allow us to open up for different possibilities and different readings, but at the end it will go back to the same center of the problem. It's just tackling it from different way, and this is the queer side of it. Like this is how queering it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, Roy, you kind of spoke to your work process. You spoke to the camera, gazing at the city and the bodies, and specifically the queer bodies being disappeared behind the camera. And there's one last formal element that I'm curious to ask you about, which is the traveling image, the constantly moving image. I just wonder if you've thought about that and what that did for the film in the context of everything that we've been talking about.
Like the film was meant to be a road movie, because in this genre of it's a diary road movie, and from here also comes the title. Like I decided to name it Montreal 2010 is as if when you're writing a diary, and instead of putting a title for the one day, you put a title for like this period of time, and this was the period of the Montreal 2010. So it's the diary title that of this period, and it is a road movie, in fact. So it's on the move. It's on the move, that with this whole feeling of the quest, to try to understand, to try to get the meaning, to try to meet a city. Yusuf was like going back and forth to the city, is like all the time moving between revisiting the city, and Brahim was for the first time arriving, not able to understand, and then deciding to leave. And this even talking all the time about like, let's go back to Beirut, like it will not take a lot of time to arrive there, let's take it by night. So it's like this whole it's like it's and if in fact, even if we're not in the car, we're even walking, like most of the time they're walking, climbing. So this movement is to put you all the time in this feeling of like the quest of trying to understand, to try to find the meanings behind everything that's happening with them, and the meaning that exists in the city, in fact.
I mean, I guess to wrap up, I kind of think one thing that one thing that we felt strongly about curating the program is we wanted kind of Arabic films in the Arabic language to deal with kind of the themes that your films deal with. And I guess maybe I can't help but kind of address the irony that we're here talking about it in English, talking about it in a way that, you know, we use the word queer, even this notion that, you know, in the Arab world, a lot of people have Arabized queer into queeri, as opposed to actually trying to reclaim the own Arabic language. And I just wanted to put that out there in terms of just addressing that, even, you know, the sadness of that, or the kind of irony of that, and how you guys feel about it.
And on a more positive note, we're hoping that the discussion that the PYM would lead after this can be bilingual, and it will be an open space for Palestinian and Arab youth in Montreal to be discussing your films in whichever language that they would like to discuss them in. But yeah, I mean, if you have any comments on, just to acknowledge the fact that we're having all of this discussion in English, when actually we all wanted to have this discussion in Arabic, but you know, many efficiencies have stopped us from doing that. Let's just say, yeah.
Yes, we are aware of this. When I say we, I'm aware of the situation. But it's really funny now when you think about terms and about making the word queer, making it Arabic word. Once we were a group of activists, queer activists, thinking about the word queer, or the queer theory, how we can translate it into Arabic. So we thought about Shaz theory. So it's something that is I think the queer movement, the Palestinian queer movement, is very aware that we're using a Western language, but I think it is the same as in feminism. It's not like taking the Western idea and try to impose it on an Eastern culture. You understand it, you learn from it, but you need to form your own movement from your own culture, from your own experience. So taking the queer theory and say, okay, now we use it as a tool to liberate the queers in Palestine. From my experience, and it was very difficult when I say, okay, I have the queer theory, I have all this academic thinking of liberation, but when I meet the Palestinian transgender working in prostitution, she doesn't care about queer theory. She doesn't understand it. Maybe she is the queer idea of it's the embodiment of all these political issues that we're talking about it, but it's not about the theory itself, the philosophy itself we're talking about. So I'm talking about the gap between who's your audience. So when your audience is an audience that you can discuss and is aware and familiar with the terms and with the language, so it's something that you can do it. But when your audience is, I don't have the term to say because I worked with transsexuals and transgenders and gays and lesbians, that they were homeless and they had to work on the streets. And when you work with this community, you can't talk what we're talking now. It's a different kind of talk. And for me, it's the place where the queer Palestinian experience is born, actually.
Roy, do you have
no, I would just say, like, honestly, from my position as an artist and a filmmaker, there's tools that I know how to use, and those tools helped me to put my ideas in films and in video and in installations. I'm not an academic. I don't like admire the work that queer theoreticians are doing, but I cannot. I don't do this. So so from my position, I think that I participate in this discussion through the work that I do, that could be part of this discussion. But I personally, I don't have the tools to be able to participate further in this, acknowledging how important it is. I don't find my role in it. It's not mine, don't find my role. I don't have the tool to be able, like my tools are through doing the films. So yeah, and speaking now in English, I find it just practical. I prefer not to, not to push it more than this.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you guys so much for giving us your time and showing us the film and sharing with us your ideas and thoughts. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raffat and Roy. It was really good hearing you. Yeah, and I'm just looking forward for all of these ideas and the films to come together into a discussion later in the event that we're organizing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.